out in the middle the body of their chief, and on top there then kindled the biggest funeral fire. The roaring of flames mingled with weeping, as the fire's red heart consumed the house of bone. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Then, in only 10 days, Beowulf's followers constructed a fortress on the headland, a beacon high and broad. What remained of the fire they cast a wall around, placed in the tomb both the torques and the jewels, and they dwell there yet, of no more use to man than in ages before. Then they rode around the barrow, 12 in all, Aethling's sons, reciting their dirge to declare their grief. They praised their king's manhood and the prowess of his hands. They raised his name.
Monuments can capture the mood of their age, and the mood of the Dark Ages, the latest pagan centuries in Europe, is very particular indeed, enterprising, brutal, poetic. This fine monument, which happens to be in Sweden, contains a dozen burial mounds dominated by the great mound of Arnun's Hög, and beside it settings of upright stones in the form of ships. These were no forsaken graveyards, but big imposing spaces, places for people to gather, places for people to meet, to worship the gods, to debate great issues, and to stand up and be counted in the presence of their ancestors. The greatest of these ancestors are commemorated by the mounds, while the ship, the most important machine in their lives, sails on as enduring as Stonehenge. Monuments are documents which show something of how a people saw itself and how it wished to be remembered. The trouble is that the message is often obscure. My job as an archaeologist is to try and decode and understand this message, to take a great ceremonial centre, look for the people who built it, and to bring them back to the light of the present day. And that's what we're trying to do at Sutton Hoo.
For in England, too, some of these great ceremonial centres are left to us. Just a few, and most are gnawed and flattened by time and the plough. They often seem expressionless now, scarcely noticeable to the passer-by. When we came to Sutton Hoo in 1983, it was first to inspect, probe, map and protect it, to know all that could be known without actually digging. We threw a battery of techniques at it, some old, some new, feeling our way beneath the counterpane to the precious strata that survived here and there. We felt, too, for the edges of a great dead prehistoric city, which had once lain spread-eagled across this piece of farmland, leaving its telltale debris of flint tools and broken pottery. We peered into the mounds, using radar, and computed the tentative signals it sent back, looking for advanced signs of buried Anglo-Saxons and their boats by conducting a kind of electronic inquest. The old explorer's notebook is long since abandoned for the machine-operated data bank, in which thousands of individual observations and measurements can be stored and stacked, waiting to play their part. And then, one day, the pieces seemed to fall into place. We were ready to start digging.
Sutton Hoo is really two archaeological sites, one on top of the other. The one on top is the Anglo-Saxon cemetery, consisting of barrows, some cremations, and, as we now know, some flat graves, including 3 under the barley fields, some 70 metres from the nearest barrow. The one underneath is a long-lived prehistoric settlement. Ditches, slots, post holes, dug and redug over some 1,500 years. This much we know from our remote sensing, from our field walking, and from the long trenches put into the fields in order to see something of what was there. But it was only a contact. We need now to see something of the structure of these two separate sites. We've seen a grave, but we haven't yet seen the complex geography of the cemetery.
The excavation about to start is the largest ever undertaken at Sutton Hoo, and one of the largest, at about 20,000 square yards, ever attempted at an English monument. We aim to strip the cover from the extreme east to the extreme west of the cemetery. A good 6 years' work. The reward is 200 to 300 eventful years of early English history. We begin where the previous trail left off, a few scattered graves contacted during reconnaissance work in the fields. The eastern edge of the burial ground should be here somewhere, and the first objective will be to find it. It's a notoriously difficult job. Old cemeteries never really end, they simply fade away. So to be sure, the dig will need a generous margin. The harvest comes off, and we prepare to gather a more bizarre harvest underneath. Holes have been punched in this same piece of gravel for about 5,000 years. For most of that time, there was no writing, no books, no newspapers. All we have of these people are the holes they dug, the often impersonal fingerprint of the archaeological feature. The Dark Ages, when England began, left virtually no written records either. Little more than a few tantalizing rumours of heroes and their adventures. Redwald, king of the East Angles, who died about 625 AD. Hugelac the Dane, who raided the Rhineland. Beowulf the Gat, who killed the monster Grendel. It was the real contemporaries of these shadowy figures who left their imprint in the sand at Sutton Hoo. The archaeological chroniclers make their own records, prizing out the clues from the sand. Clues which need a mix of wind and rain to make them clearly visible. The wind is always there, but if the rain is short, we make it ourselves. There's nothing quite like opening up a new bit of an archaeological site. You're so sure that this time you'll hit the jackpot. This time it's all going to make sense. Key structures, like an Anglo-Saxon palace, there must be one around here somewhere, or a temple, why not? Whatever did happen here, and whoever did what to whom, the indelible evidence remains, under a few inches of plough soil. The Eastern Front pushes out into new territory, and the trawlers will be the first to know what's in store over the next few months. Elsewhere, on the cleaned surface, the work breaks down into a series of one-to-one encounters between excavator and corpse. Many cemeteries are impressive in their order and organisation. Burial is orthodox, and all the bodies look much alike. Sutton Hoo isn't like that. Here, every burial is different. Every digger gets just one chance to bring that body back the way it was. Mistakes cannot be rectified later. A nervous twitch of the trowel, a clumsy foot on the balk, and the delicate sand sculpture is gone. Archaeological excavation is no picnic, but it often makes a great spectacle. The word is out. Digging has restarted at Sutton Hoo, and people come from all over Europe and beyond, drawn by the mystery that surrounds King Redworld and his people. Visitors know that we'll all have to wait for the whole story. But there's still nothing like being there as the discoveries are made. The first sight of things hidden for over 1,000 years.
He's trying desperately to try and get the shadow of the body. It really is.
These are graves, two in the foreground, and then where William is working behind his screen, there is an east-west grave, a head to west, feet to east grave, cutting a northwest southeast grave. It's rather like a brown person lying in very dirty bathwater with just the knees sticking up and the head and shoulders slumped at one end. And then as William removes, so to speak, the bathwater, more and more of him is revealed. But the definition is poor. It's not going to give you, for example, the individual ribs of the rib cage. It's much more a brown mass round the rib cage, a solid ball for the head, where there are some skull fragments, but very few. And the problem is, of course, that we can't tell what sex such people are. It's very difficult to tell what age they died at. And this is still a tremendous problem, and it's not easy to see at the moment how we could solve it.
The answer must lie in soil chemistry. We need techniques of post-mortem suitable for people who died 1,300 years ago. As work gets underway in each of the new graves, it's time to go aloft and record the changing surface of the site as it sweats out its features. The higher you go, the more you see. And the more you see, the more you understand.
Morning.
Morning, sir.
Morning. Hello.
The Anglo-Saxons never saw themselves from up here, but they knew they were part of a bigger, richer landscape, a network of woods, ponds, meadows, spinneys, creeks and estuaries. For them, a day's journey, for us, a bird's eye view.
Keep the microphones up closer to your lips so we can all understand you better, sir. Sorry. No problem.
Get the demon in the background.
Yes, we can do that.
Same angle of sight in the foreground and the demon stretching away in the background. It's not far off now, actually. The trouble is it's so misty.
Somewhere under this county of Suffolk are the villages, manors, markets and harbours of the vanished community that built our mounds.
Do you want the White House in the background, Sue?
Yeah, I think there's to the back end where approach the farm.
Nigel, do you want to give me the side camera?
27 Woodward's Tower.
What really mattered to the Anglo-Saxons were herrings, barley, cattle, pigs and oak trees. It was successful farming that ultimately produced gold buckles and decorated helmets. I see these farmers, the earliest English, as I think they saw themselves, a weave of different peoples and social ranks. Southfolk, East Anglians, Islanders, Northerners, all at the same time. But their upper classes were cosmopolitan and mobile, with aunts in Denmark and in-laws in Wales. Their ideology was manic competition.
We've only got one more subject we can do today. That's with the close-up of the site with people working, but they haven't arrived yet. In 2 minutes, they'll be back on site working.
Certainly, Redwold would have delighted in a helicopter gunship. A sea dragon, he'd have called it, a cloud treader, a machine that could emerge from the mist and strike without warning, very much to the taste of the 7th century.
You like to go down the Devon to the sea?
Up this river came the earliest English, from homelands in what are now Holland, or Germany, or Denmark. Some of them settled around Felixstowe or Ipswich. Some left, perhaps to return when prospects improved. To these people, married to their ships, the North Sea was no barrier, but an arterial high road that linked their investments and their kin.
Understanding Sutton Hoo, trying to find out why in the 7th century AD people in East Anglia suddenly started burying their dead in earth mounds accompanied by priceless treasures, that means finding out who else was doing it. And curiously enough, the most striking parallels have come to light over 1,000 miles away in the beautiful valley of the Mälaren, the land of a people known as the Sphere, creators of Sverige, modern Sweden. In the 7th century AD, the Sphere had kings, or something very like them, and here at Old Uppsala is their royal burial ground. The 3 giant mounds behind me are thought to have contained the cremated remains of the princes of the Inglinger family, just as at Sutton Hoo we think it is the Waffingers who are buried in the mounds there. These great mounds of earth are the pyramids of the north, like the pyramids requiring great human resources for their construction, and like the pyramids designed to express power in life and immortality after.
The Inglinger were just one family in a large warrior class, a warrior class all out to demonstrate their supremacy and aggression using craftsmanship and symbolism. Not far from Uppsala, just up the river Fyris, at a little farm called Valsgärde, more than a dozen rich burials were found crowded onto a ridge. Some contained ships up to 30 feet long. Swedish scholars have grappled with the interpretation of burials like these for more than half a century. As at Sutton Hoo, believed to have some of the last intact mounds in Europe, the burials here are enigmatic. Ship burials without a body. Their problems are our problems. Valsgärde man was belligerent, self-confident and well off, if his death and burial are anything to go by. His was the reality of the King Arthur myth. He rested in his boat on a heap of goose-down cushions, his sword and helmet at his feet, a cargo of food in the forward hold, an ox, a wild boar, a snowy owl, and 3 young, richly caparisoned stallions heaped on the deck of his royal barge for its last journey.
The custom of burying people in boats may well have originated in Sweden, land of rivers and lakes and boats. This is the village of Vendel, and the obelisk commemorates the spot where no less than 14 ship burials were found side by side, the earliest of them dating from the age of Sutton Hoo. The ship burials at Vendel were discovered when the churchyard was extended to bury some of Vendel's more recent dead. In fact, in Sweden, it's not so uncommon to find Christian church and pagan burial ground sharing the same site. The new religion had, of course, come to stay, but the old was respected. The mounds were not so often swept away, but remained as monuments to an older form of human wisdom.
It is right a man be lavish in honouring his lord and his friend, should love him in his heart, when the leading forth from the house of flesh befalls him at last.
All over northern Europe, on the eve of Christianity, the last of the pagans were burying the best that their craftsmen knew how to make. They believed, no doubt, that these time capsules could communicate with the hereafter more surely than words or books. Perhaps they were right. The imagery of warriors, the obsession with status, the cult of the hero, the language of the metalsmith, rotting animals and fiery jewels. These objects are, well, not quite as splendid as those from Sutton Hoo, but so like them that these peoples, the people of East Anglia and the people of eastern Sweden, separate in space but close in spirit, must surely have known each other.
And just as Sutton Hoo lies at the edge of the East Anglian kingdom, so Vendel lies on the very edge of the settlement area of the Swedish upland. To the north stretches the forest, almost uninterrupted until the Arctic Circle, while to the south the valleys stretch away with their calm, sinuous waterways, leading now, as they led then, to the waters of the Baltic, of the North Sea, to the Volga, to the ancient civilizations of the Arabs and the Romans, and to the new kingdoms of the Franks and the English. Mid-season, nice big area open, and we're really beginning to be able to see what's happening. The area is divided into three parts at present. One of them is the situation exactly underneath the plough soil with just a couple of cleanings. Now, at this level, we can see traces dimly of the features that lie beneath. For example, the grey strip of a modern anti-glider ditch, since been ploughed away. But we'd also see the pattern of stones, which I think must have been left by former earthworks. Now, this is rather exciting, because what it means is that the site that we are on at present was covered in earthworks at about the time the Anglo-Saxons came here. It's always a bit of a puzzle as to why the Anglo-Saxons should have chosen this area for their cemetery. Somebody would have had to remember that the site was a famous prehistoric settlement, but not really anymore, because as it was covered in earthworks, it was a landmark and therefore could be adopted by the Anglo-Saxons as an eminent spot of some kind. Now, the next area, which is, has already been subjected to 2 or 3 trowelings, that shows us the graves. The graves show quite characteristically as lozenges of sand and gravel, and they're also a characteristic size and proportion, 2 meters long and ½ meter wide. And in the third area, the excavation has begun. Half a dozen graves already under excavation. And important and interesting and most satisfying, they do seem to stop where we predicted they would. So this ought to be the edge of the Anglo-Saxon cemetery. But there is one rather puzzling feature. It sits in the middle of the site. It's a patch of brown earth. It's got at least 2 straightish sides, and beside it is a narrow strip shaped like a letter D. Now, I don't know what this could be. It doesn't seem to fit into the pattern of the prehistoric features. It doesn't easily seem to fit into the pattern of the Anglo-Saxon cemetery. Nevertheless, it's of great importance because it seems to stand just at the edge of the graves. I've no idea what it could be, but we aim to find out.
The new graves have lots to tell us, and at every one we hold a separate inquest and transcribe the evidence. They may be just sand and patterns in the sand, but these are patterns with a meaning.
This burial first appeared, like so many others, as a stain in the sand, rather like the Turin shroud. And as we came down, we could identify the legs and the arms. Rather surprisingly, he appeared to have his head in his lap. Well, now, this was quite interesting because such burial rites, where the head is deliberately placed beneath the legs, are known in the late Roman period. But a little further excavation showed us what had actually happened. There was another burial beneath the first one, and the head almost certainly belongs to the one underneath. Very soon we shall take this body away, reveal the one underneath, and fully expect to find it headless.
Head number one goes into the bag and off to the laboratory. The excavators dismantle everything, but information is still bound up in the chunks that are saved. Information like age, sex, and date.
The teeth that might survive, so we'll have to watch for them. I think there'll be a few breaks. See, there's some bone. There you go. It's in a very bad state.
Two radiocarbon dates from these graves tell us that we're in the 7th century, the same date as the ship burial. There are no swords, no helmets here, but there is, occasionally, something else. This sand shape comes from the hip bone of an animal placed in the grave as a joint of meat. Another singular example of a pagan custom. Such things certainly set the alarm bells ringing. What other delicate organic traces are lurking in the sand? Objects which were once wood or cloth or bone. These are not just clues for burial rite, but clues for religious belief. Revealing these sand sculptures is work for scientist, artist, and gymnast combined. Nothing in this cemetery is wholly predictable. In each of these pits should be a person, but how they are lying and what lies with them cannot be guessed or invented. These are shapes which grow under your hand.
Last Saturday, Francis was brushing carefully away at the head of this burial, and the brown crust which covered it came away to reveal the polished brown pate of the skull within. What this means is that the bone itself had survived at that point, and what she must have been taking off was something else. The brown crust that we've used to define the bodies is therefore probably not exclusively the bone line, but perhaps the flesh itself.
We'd like to take him home with us, but how?
Yes, it was, yes. Pull it across once it's like if you find it's pulling the soil off, then you just have to trickle it on. But
It was a local sculptor who told me about the silicon rubber technique, which they used to take moulds of the live bodies of artists' models. And a local company taught us how to use it. Some of the bodies we excavate look very lifelike, far more lifelike than the skeleton you usually find underground. The first moment of exposure is the key moment, when all the subtleties of colour and shape are surprised by the daylight. It's a moment we dearly love to capture. True, we make detailed drawings, measurements, and colour photographs of every burial, recording as accurately as we know how the intricate variations of the shape. But it isn't a shape you can feel.
Yeah.
After an hour or two, the rubber solution sets and can be unpeeled. Then a fiberglass positive can be made. It's a day's work for the excavation team and costs about £200 a time. But this is not just a gimmick. After all, these bodies are the main characters in our story, characters in search of an author. We've broken the bond of centuries between each body and the earth, and we owe them another kind of immortality. Some people might find all this a little ghoulish. Surely these poor Saxons had little enough dignity in life without being dug up and slandered in the name of science. But others, and I think archaeologists are generally among them, believe that the dead do have much to tell us and think we should listen to them and learn.
Oh, brilliant. Not the light one that comes up.
Hey, there's his teeth.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, that's a bit sticky.
The rubber mould records every contour and crevice, and records, too, every careless cut of the trowel, every brush mark.
We're going to put the other one on top.
The finished replica carries a skin of sand a millimetre thick, lifted from the original Sandman. This adds to the authenticity, a perfect copy for further study and visitors to see as nearly as possible what we saw. This example, with his broken neck, is the Hanged Man.
Weight on here then. Don't get pulled off the ground at any time, okay? No time get pulled off the ground.
Right.
To some extent, the site photographer is the hero of the excavation team, just as the artist was in the early days of archaeology, in desert or jungle. This is a racing balloon, reined in to keep it on station over the site at heights up to 500 feet. The buried natural landscape is marked by ditches and palisade trenches. We think these are stock enclosures of the Neolithic period, the latest Stone Age of about 5,000 years ago. The prehistoric enclosures would have been earthworks when the Anglo-Saxons came and put their graves there.
Yeah. We want to go in considerably but slowly to give it over the grave. Let it move down on the left.
The story so far, captured on film, leaves this pattern as it dries in the wind, and it gives the blueprint for the rest of this season's digging. Not much time left now, and plenty of problems still to solve. With some of the bizarre ways the bodies have been placed in the graves, an excavator can find himself revealing something as precarious as a house of cards. This one was such a tangle of limbs it looked like no human body. More like the whole carcass of an animal, a sheep perhaps, or a calf. Unusual, but not impossible. It lay next to a definite human, buried with the arms stretched above the head. It lay in its own pit, specially cut to size. A pet, perhaps? A sacrifice?
Well, a few more days of careful excavation gave us the answer. It is, in fact, a human, and a human buried in a most peculiar position. I think rather like this. Can you tell me whether I've got this right, Agostino? Right. Rather uncomfortable, I think you'll agree. And when you bear in mind that the top of the head was missing, I think we must have somebody here who'd been executed.
Nor was it the only one. It gradually dawned on us that no less than 9 bodies out of 15 excavated had met a sticky end. One had a broken neck. Another folded, bound or kneeling. Another 2 lay together face down. But in every case, the grave was dug to take the posture. This was no casual dumping of the dead. One was buried, laid out, in a sitting position, in a wooden box. Another lay wrist over wrist, as if tied. Many were clearly young, and the last was the oddest of all.
This astonishing burial took over 90 hours to excavate. It's a burial which includes a wooden artifact. Now, the bone is brown and the wood is grey and black, and that is how we told the difference. The person is lying almost in the form of a hurdler, with one leg back, one leg forward, and the 2 arms pushing forward, and the back slightly bent. The wood consists of 2 handle-like objects, and then a large piece of wood with a sort of beak and a sort of eye and a sort of foot at one end. And then a long, straight staff. What could they be? I think the most likely interpretation of this is that this is a broken and very primitive plough. And the man is lying, not like a hurdler, but like a ploughman, actually in the act of ploughing. Now, nothing quite like this has been seen before. It is an astonishing discovery, and a vignette as different as it could possibly be imagined from the great ship burial only 100 yards away.
It might be easier to explain this peculiar group of burials if we could find a building to go with them. Well, what about that D-shaped feature? I'd felt sure that it would be a building of great significance, but it turned out not to be a building at all. After we'd found one, we saw another, and each one proved to be an empty, jagged hole. So what were they? And what were they doing there?
I think this mystery is now solved. These curious features represent the holes that have been left by trees which have blown down. The tree falls, the root mantle comes up, and into one half of the void forces the topsoil, and in the other half, the gravel. This one, like the other tree we found, was blown down like that by a wind from the south. Date? Not yet known. They could be part of the Neolithic land clearance, or they could be the remnants of a grove sacred to the Anglo-Saxons. Why not?
Sacred groves were known to pagan northern religions, and Adam of Bremen, a Christian visiting Sweden in the 11th century, actually records one.
It is customary to solemnize in Uppsala, at 9-year intervals, a general feast of all the provinces of Sweden. The sacrifice is of this nature. Of every living thing that is male, they offer 9 heads, with the blood of which it is customary to placate gods of this sort. The bodies they hang in the sacred grove. Even dogs and horses hang there with men. A Christian told me that he had seen 72 bodies suspended there promiscuously.
The kind of things that are said to have taken place here strike us as absolutely appalling, and it's hard to imagine the frame of mind which could motivate human beings to act in this way. Hanging up men and animals from a tree seems like the action of a demented sadist. But to them, it might have seemed simply a wise precaution to take in a hostile and unpredictable world. However harsh people and their times, they still need to strive after immortality. And Adam of Bremen's words may perhaps explain the strange discoveries made adjacent to our burial mounds at Sutton Hoo, where we have 9 executions, at least one of them by hanging, and a bit further off, a tree blown down. Uppsala and Sutton Hoo are 1,000 miles apart, but why should the pagan English have been less squeamish than the northern neighbours with whom they had so much in common?
"500 years before Adam's visit to Uppsala, the Sutton Hoo cemetery was being used. And whatever the pagan rites of the English, they were surely being practiced here. And at about that time, the peoples of England were becoming Christian. So Christianity too should have somehow left its stamp. It is a cemetery, if anything, that should carry the signs of Anglo-Saxon attitudes to the supernatural. There is now no one we can ask if we want to know the meaning of a slaughtered corpse folded in a grave, or one buried face down, or the burial of a plough or a joint of meat, or the placing of a little cairn of stones above the grave, or even the way the graves were oriented in the ground. Some believe graves point to the position of the sunrise on the day of death, but this cannot be true of all. One thing is clear. Here, the custom changed. While earlier burials looked north or northwest, the later were laid west to east. All these clues can only begin to make sense when we have enough of them, and when they are put together on a map. The map shows what never could have been seen in reality, all the incidents together. Those owed to prehistoric peoples, and then the graves of the Anglo-Saxons, the first of the Christians, perhaps, following the last of the pagans.
What are we to make of this great, strange cemetery? Were these Anglo-Saxons? And how do they connect with the ship burials, those monuments which the Anglo-Saxons have left us at the other end of the site? The ploughman, with his plough, suggests some kind of a rural, nostalgic paganism, and perhaps the cemetery was all of a piece and continued in use from the 6th century through to the 9th, a little enclave of paganism from the time of the Red World to the time of the Vikings. Now, if that is so, this has extraordinary implications for the early history of England. On the other hand, why is it that so many of our new graves are aligned east-west, which is usually the Christian manner, and perhaps the people of Sutton, like elsewhere in East Anglia, were converted by the missions of Furza, the missions of Felix, and became Christian? There is, however, another possibility, and that is that the pagan cemetery went out of use, but was remembered and feared. It was used only by the outcasts of later society, the misfits, and the criminals. This is suggested by the curious attitudes in which we found some of the burials.
Criminals or sacrificial victims? Pagans or Christians? The burial mounds are great pagan monuments, which we ourselves are very shortly to enter. But Sutton Hoo seems to have been a battleground for the gods. Redwell's ship burial contained Christian symbols, silver bowls bearing the Christian cross imported from Christian Constantinople, and spoons marked Paulos and Saulos in Greek. Are these baptismal spoons? If so, why are they buried in a pagan burial mound?
Seems very likely that at Sutton Hoo we're going to witness more signs of the struggle between Christianity and paganism, between the old traditions of the North and the new vision of Rome, nothing less than a struggle for the soul of England herself. Now, of course, the Christian faction won, but 10,000 years of accumulated pagan wisdom were not likely to disappear overnight. And in many places, there were clearly people who were anxious that they shouldn't. Redwald, king of East Anglia, who was apparently buried at Sutton Hoo, erected, so we're told, an altar to Christ and an altar to Woden in the same temple, while here at Denmark's oldest royal burial ground at Jelling, the two huge pagan burial mounds seem almost to stand guard over the Christian church. And it is here that a very deliberate form of continuity seems to be indicated.
Two great rune stones tell the story. Harold made this monument in memory of Gorm, his father, and Thira, his mother. He was that Harold who won for himself all Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christians. And this is how they saw Christ, bound and sacrificed on a tree. Harold lived in the 10th century AD, but the Danes never forgot their royal site at Jelling. Tradition had old King Gorm in the north mound and Thira in the south. Both mounds were opened in the early days of archaeology. In Gorm's mound was a wooden burial chamber, already entered and resealed in antiquity. There was no body, only a few scraps of decorated metal. In this south mound was nothing, but beneath it lay a giant stone setting in the form of a ship. Jelling was a great ceremonial centre in pagan as in Christian times. But where was its last pagan king? The church, too, has been excavated, but much more recently. Under the church was an earlier church, and centrally within it, a large grave containing a few long bones and a skull. Knut Grøg, the excavator, carefully disinterred and examined these odd remains. They had belonged to a man, stocky and strong and rich. He'd been buried with scraps of precious metal which exactly matched those of the North Mound, and was wrapped in a garment woven with gold braid. All the signs pointed in one direction. This was the head of King Gorm. Harold, known as Bluetooth, creator of Christian Denmark, had actually dug up his pagan father and brought him as best he might out of the burial mound he'd once built him and into the new Christian church, out of Valhalla and into the kingdom of Christ.
People sometimes say to me, well, it's a good story, but how can you be sure? The answer, of course, is that I can't be sure. The world hidden beneath our feet, the archaeologist's domain, is so vast and often so unfamiliar that it's never going to be easy to go down into it and send back coherent dispatches. We can't be sure. We can only be careful. Sutton Hoo, Jelling, Uppsala are points of entry into an ancient experience which many countries of Europe once shared. By comparing them, we can sometimes explain the aspects of human behavior that we encounter, however strange.
And the last in this series of programmes is tomorrow afternoon at the same time, just after the 3 o'clock news.